Hello and welcome to the CBV podcast.
Hello and welcome. Hope everyone's having a great day today. So, a few weeks ago, I watched for the first time Michael Bay's 1998 film Armageddon. So for this review, I will first give out a non-spoiler rundown of my experience watching this, and then I will make it very clear when I go into my spoiler review to talk about specific points of the film. I know this film has been out for like 22 years now, so it seems a bit odd for me to be worried about spoilers, but because I went into this film mostly blind, I think that's why I managed to enjoy it as much as I did. So just to give you guys the option of having the same experience that I did, I will first start off with my non-spoiler review of this film. So for this section, I'm only going to be telling you guys everything that I was aware of before watching this film, so you can hopefully get more out of your first viewing and hopefully enjoy it more. So if you haven't heard of this film, Armageddon is about a meteor that's heading towards Earth, and if it collides with the planet, all of humanity will be wiped out. So the government's solution is to send out a team of deep core drillers, which feature actors including Bruce Willis, Ben Affleck, and a few surprising appearances as well. They want to send these deep core drillers out into space to drill into the meteor and blow it up before it reaches Earth. Now, immediately you might think, hang on a second. Their plan is to send drillers out into space to blow this thing up. Wouldn't it be easier to train astronauts to drill and send them into space to do the mission rather than training drillers to become astronauts? And the answer is yes. Yes, it would. But if this plot point is something that you can't suspend your disbelief for, or at least accept, then you will not like this movie, because it's the whole point of the film. It's what the film hinges upon. For me, I didn't care about how stupid the plot was, because right from the get-go in this film, it establishes how over the top and silly the whole premise is, and it kind of embraces that the sort of dumb movie element. So, you know, if it's just accepting what it is, then I'll accept into the silly premise. I mean, the CGI is gloriously bad, the acting is cheesy, the comedy doesn't always land, but it still puts a smile on my face, and it just mostly knows what it wants to be. So I genuinely really had a good time watching this for the most part, because it didn't feel like it was trying to be realistic or serious at all. However, having said that, that was up until the third act of the film, where all of a sudden, the first two acts are silly, embraces its weird premise, and then by the third act of the film, it takes a sudden tonal shift, and it takes itself too seriously, which was such a shame, because that's when the film began to drag and get boring. It's the final act's tone. I mean, if that final act had matched the tone of the first two acts, then this would have been such a fun guilty pleasure film for me, but because of how bland and generic it feels by the end, I can't see myself choosing to watch this again anytime soon, unless maybe someone hasn't seen it and wants to see it, and then I'll watch it with them. It also doesn't help that this is a 2.5 hour movie, which to me is way too long for a movie with a really simple and understandable premise, and it's surprising that as long as this film is, you really don't get to know much about these team of drillers, because they're all just playing stereotypes of different character types. Like, that we don't really get an insight into the things they like, what they're passionate about, what's sort of their motivation. They just kind of like go along with it. Like, we kind of get a bit of an insight into Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck's characters, but other than that, like, even they don't get a lot of development at all. But apart from that, overall, I really enjoyed this film from the beginning, and then after the 2/3 of watching, I then started to lose all interest in that final act. But if I had to sum up this movie in one phrase, then I would say this is Suicide Squad in space, and I say that just because it's similar in the fact that the government are sending a team of misfits on a mission to save the world that will probably get them killed. So right there, that just sounds like Suicide Squad. But in this case, it's in space. I still recommend you watch this film because those first two acts were really fun and silly enough for me to enjoy, and who knows, you might think differently, that the final act isn't too serious, because you do still have the odd character still being ridiculous by the end, and the premise of blowing up a meteor by drilling into it is still bizarre. But it may not be as good as I hoped it would because of that final act. But I'm still glad I finally got round to watching it, because to be honest, the only reason I watched Armageddon was because I just happened to find a copy of it on DVD in my house. If it wasn't for that, I probably would have not gone out of my way to watch this whatsoever. But now that I've seen it, I can say I would recommend it. Still give it a go. It's still fun. It's just that third act kind of drags a little bit. But maybe you might think differently. You might be able to enjoy it just as much. But that's basically everything I have to say as vaguely as I possibly can about this film. So yeah, still recommend it. But, it's not going to be anything mind-blowing or hilarious. It is just a dumb, fun film. So yeah, here we go. Warning for anyone who cares. This is a spoiler alert. I'm about to go into my spoiler talk and ruin all the bizarre moments that I didn't expect. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. Okay, you've been warned. Okay, let's go into the spoiler review. There are so many moments that were so strange, funny, and ridiculous that I just had to take notes on specific moments that occurred as I watched the film, just to best flesh out how I experienced watching Armageddon and what was standing out in my brain as I'm watching it. So bear with me, and I'm just going to read my notes. So just bear with me and enjoy the insanity of what this film has in it. So right away, we start in the film with cheesy voiceovers explaining how the dinosaurs were extinct because of a meteor. Immediately, I'm like, okay, right. Well, this definitely does feel like a 90s film. Then, if we're going for the VO, and I love the movie VO guy who does all the voiceovers. So yeah, not a bad start. I mean, clearly it's not going to be anything amazing, but still, I like the VO guys. I think we should bring them back for silly films like this. Then we get a really bad CGI explosion right at the beginning of the film as a meteor shower hits this astronaut who's out in space. It hits his visor, his helmet smashes, and somehow he screams as he floats away rather than just dying immediately from exposure to the vacuum of space. So I don't even know how he's able to scream. Plus, this death has so many unnecessary cuts in the film. I mean, it really cut back and forth like 20 times just looking at this one guy getting hit by a meteor in space and dying in the vacuum of space. Like, it was really weird. I was like, why are they like cutting so much around this one 10-second scene that doesn't even need to be 10 seconds long, because you would die immediately. And how the hell can he scream in space? It was just so bizarre. So at that point, I'm like, okay, I think I'm starting to get an idea what this film is going to be like. I mean, the fact that it's a Michael Bay film should also tell me something, but I've only seen a few Michael Bay films. I've seen the Transformer films, I've seen The Island, and now I've seen this. So I was starting to get an idea of what the approach to this film was going to be. Then all of a sudden, after that astronaut dies in space, we get Bad Santa running a NASA mission. The actor of Bad Santa was in it, and that just kind of took me by surprise. I was like, okay, so this guy's in it. That'll be interesting to see if he goes for the serious approach or the comedic approach, and he kind of goes for the straight man, but there's a little bit of a wink to how ridiculous everything is, so I'm like, okay, he's not a bad actor for that. And then we just go from NASA into the main city of, I'm trying to figure out what city, I think it was New York or something, I'm not sure. But anyway, we're in the city, and we see this random guy who, oh no, we're not in the city, sorry about that. I don't know where we are. We're somewhere in America that isn't NASA. We're focusing on normal civilians, and this random guy first sees a meteor. I think he's looking for a telescope, and he has a go at his wife. He tries to get attention and shouts, "Get the book! Get the book! Get the book!" because he's seeing this meteor. And that was such a weird piece of dialogue to give him. Like at first I was like, what is he talking about? He's just shouting at his wife, "Get the book! Get the book!" So right from that weird delivery of lines, or even choice of lines, I was like, okay, I doubt this film is meant to be serious, because that was such a weird delivery. It's also such a weird phrase to shout at a woman when you have no idea what he's really talking about, but he wants the book, obviously, whatever this is. And then we cut to the first meteor hitting Earth somehow. It's a piece of the meteor has broken off, and that piece of the meteor it hits Earth. I think it's in I don't want to say New York, I can't remember. It's an American city, breaks off, hits that city, and somehow only kills one guy who was talking to another guy in a really close proximity. Literally, these two guys are having some kind of a conversation in about as much distance as you would have talking to your friend, and all of a sudden a meteor hits them, misses one guy somehow, but takes out the other guy. There's a huge crater in front of him. That second guy would have definitely been dead, but the second guy was holding a dog who's also been hit by the meteor, and I know this because the dog is in sort of the crater that the meteor has created. He's just dangling from his collar, and probably getting strangled from hanging like that. And it's just like, what the hell? How the hell did that guy survive? How the hell did the dog survive? And when that happened, I'm just like, okay, this is a straight up comedy. There is no way that this film is taking itself seriously in any capacity whatsoever. And even when the meteor crashes, it's inglorious bad CGI. It's just everywhere, this CGI, as the meteor showers crash into the city, and I loved it. I'm just like, okay, we're just going full on out 2012 style with how stupid this premise is. Okay, cool, love it. And then the random guy we first meet, who first noticed the meteor, he gets in contact with NASA to let them know that he's seen this. And somehow he has a request, kind of like as a reward for noticing the meteor. And he says he wants the meteor to be named after his wife, Dottie. And they're like, oh, that's nice of you. And he's like, yeah, because she's a life-sucking bitch from where there's no escape. And I'm like, okay, right, okay, I'm kind of loving this character, but I'm guessing he's not going to be in the movie that, at all. And he's not. Literally after that, we never see him again, which I was a little disappointed at, because he had such weird lines of dialogue that I was kind of getting into it. Then we find out that we have, from NASA, we find out we have 18 days till the end of the world. All scientists are explaining how big the meteor is and why they didn't see it coming. And it's all being explained in detail, but then these scientists are cut off with their high scientific vocabulary, and it's just super dumbed down by by another guy. I think it's the bad Santa actor. It's just dumbed down for the audience, just to say, obviously we realize you don't know what the hell these scientist characters are talking about, so I'm just gonna narrow it down for you that this is why we didn't see the meteor coming, and this is sort of our predictions for what's going to happen with this meteor. So I'm like, okay, cool. I can just sit back, turn my brain off. There's no way I actually need to understand in full depth what's going on, because I've got characters like this to just kind of dumb it down for me. Like, cool, this is a turn your brain off popcorn movie. Okay, I'm in. I'm fully in. And then we cut from NASA explaining, obviously, that this meteor is heading to Earth. We cut from them, and we cut to this drilling company where Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck work at, and I'm loving the fact that we get some ZZ Top music to introduce us to meeting the guys who work at this oil rig company. Bruce Willis is trying to He's trying to get Ben Affleck to work because I think he overslept or something, and then he realizes that the reason Ben Affleck wasn't up for work was because he was sleeping with Bruce Willis's daughter. Obviously, bit of an awkward situation, and Bruce Willis just kind of casually, he threatens him with a gun and then actually tries to shoot Ben Affleck with a gun. And I'm like, for some dads, I'm sure that's quite a normal reaction, but when you're on when you're at work and you're working on an oil rig, that's kind of an extreme reaction. And fair play, I'm sure some people would do that if they saw someone sleeping with their daughter. But the weird thing is, as he's trying to shoot Ben Affleck across their working environment, all the other guys, I'm like, oh man, no, come on, leave him alone. He's just a kid, man. I'm like, he's got a fucking gun at him. Like, can someone please take the gun off Bruce Willis? I mean, obviously, I'm happy to see that Bruce Willis is going insane against him, but in real life, I'm like, does no one want to, like, take the gun off Bruce Willis? Like, this is quite an overreaction, to the point where I think he shoots something that ricochets and hits Ben Affleck in the shin. I'm like, wow, okay, right. So there's, Bruce Willis ain't messing around. Eventually he calms down, leaves them alone, and then we cut back to NASA. Like, there's a lot of cutting back and forth. So then we've cut back to NASA again, and the scientists are saying that the best way to stop the meteor is to drill into it in space, so that they can essentially blow it up before it ever reaches Earth. And as I said, would it not be easier to send astronauts who are trained to drill up there? Because learning to drill is a lot more of a quicker process and an easier task to learn than learning to become an astronaut. And they don't go for that. They go find the best drillers in the business, which is Bruce Willis and his team. And they're like, hey, we need you to save the world. We've got a meteor coming, and we need you to drill into this meteor, because otherwise we're all doomed. And then at that point, you just have to accept what's happening is happening. This most illogical thing in this movie has started. It's just bizarre why. I think I've heard an interview or some kind of audio recording where Ben Affleck has admitted that he went up to Michael Bay and said, hey man, like wouldn't it be easier to train astronauts to do drilling, or maybe we should make the movie make sense? And apparently it sounds like Michael Bay just went, just do your job. Like, you're getting paid. We did the script. We've got everything sorted. Just do your job and do some acting. So I'm glad one of the actors said it, because I don't know how Michael Bay got a cast like this into such a silly premised movie. By the time NASA has told Bruce Willis and his team, what's happening, they're like, you have 12 days to learn to become astronauts, so we can, fly you up on the day that it's likely to hit the Earth, and, start drilling and, saving the Earth. And I'm like, what the hell? You have 12 days to learn to become an astronaut. Astronauts take years to get to where they are. You're going to train these oil guys in 12 days. And not only do you have 12 days to learn to do this really advanced thing, but you're going to send them up on the day of impact in the hopes that they just manage to drill down it in time. Like, wouldn't you want to send them, like, I don't know, at least a day in advance, just so they got plenty of time to get around any problems they might occur? Because it's not like NASA's got a history of drilling into meteors, I would presume, especially when the meteor is still flying towards the Earth and you're somehow going to land on a moving meteor. Like, it was just so ridiculous that I loved that. I was like, okay, right, okay, it gets sillier. Okay, let's see how far this goes. But yeah, this really is the moment. You just have to ignore all logic, and enjoy the ridiculousness that is Armageddon. Then we get then kicks in a cover of the Beatles, Come Together, as Bruce Willis is assembling his team of diggers in a manner that Suicide Squad didn't have the restraint to do. Believe it or not, Armageddon does this whole introduction to the teams in a way that Suicide Squad probably should have done this, because with Suicide Squad, they were relying on I think they're relying on all sorts of different music cues to introduce the characters. Like, for example, in Suicide Squad, Will Smith got the introduction of his character Deadshot to the song Standing in the Rain by the Black Keys and some other artists. And then, Captain Boomerang gets the music cue of AC/DC, Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap, that song. And, basically they all get their own music cues. Harley Quinn is, You Don't Own Me, blah, 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 blah. So you can see, there's a pattern in Suicide Squad. And not only that, but in Suicide Squad, they get these over-the-top text credits to explain what the character's called, what all their abilities are, and what's their history. So much so that in Suicide Squad, when you try reading all the text they provide about the characters, that you've missed half the text because it cuts away so quickly. Whereas in this film, they just keep one piece of music, come together across the whole introduction of each character, and instead of like just showing you it in text, they talk about it, they show you what they're up to, and they go get them. So yeah, it was fun to see that they did the Suicide Squad thing before Suicide Squad did it. But yeah, so that was quite fun, and it was just interesting to see the similarities between those two films on that level. But then as they're introducing the team of people that are going to be on this mission, wait a minute, Owen Wilson was in this movie? When did this happen? I didn't see Owen Wilson on Bruce Willis's oil rig company, and all of a sudden Owen Wilson is like, yeah, we need this guy, Owen Wilson's the man, let's bring him in to do the mission. I did not see that coming. That came out of nowhere for me. Maybe he was in the background of the earlier scenes and I just missed it, but I'm like, you cannot miss Owen Wilson. He has got such a distinct personality and voice and way of acting that I would have thought I would have seen him earlier. Then the song Superfly, that song plays while Steve Buscemi has... oh, so I'm just reading my notes now. So, okay, sorry, let me just take a moment. After they assemble the team and they've got everyone they want, including Steve Buscemi, which I was very impressed because I'm a big fan of him, so it was very nice to see he's in this team. But if you don't know, Steve Buscemi basically plays the horny one of the group. That's kind of his whole shtick, is he just wants to get laid and he just wants to constantly pursue for a woman and have a good time. But as they've all been recruited and taken into NASA, they go through all this sort of medical assessments of like their psychological assessments and physical assessments to make sure that they're fit and able to actually go out in space. And while Steve Buscemi is having his physical examination, the song Superfly plays while he's having his anus probed by a singing nurse, and I was like, okay, such an unusual and weird combination of elements with the song, the actor, the situation, and how the person goes about the situation. That really stuck up my mind as like, a what the fuck moment is going on here. Yeah, I'll never get that image out of my mind. A singing nurse anally probing Steve Buscemi for a NASA mission. Yeah, did not expect to see that in this film. And I love the fact that this film's soundtrack, I just love all the music they use. I mean, it's kind of like Suicide Squad in the sense that they just bring out the next cool piece of music, but if you can believe it, a little bit more of a dialed down version of Suicide Squad. I mean, it still uses it a lot, but because this film is openly admitting to how stupid it is, I kind of let it slide that it uses all this ridiculous music, because, I don't know, if this film came out after Suicide Squad, part of me would be thinking like, actually, Suicide Squad feels like a spoof of this movie, actually, in some ways, so I don't know, but I just went along with it because it was hyping me up for how silly this movie really was. Whereas Suicide Squad, I think it tries to take itself a little bit more seriously. So yeah, they've had their medical examinations. They're all fit to go into space, or as fit as can be. And then the drillers are getting trained in 12 days to learn how to travel in space. Now, another thing that you have to suspend your disbelief is these drillers apparently can easily upgrade NASA's technology even though they have no real knowledge of space travel. So, you know, they're showing them, okay, this is the thing we're going to travel in, and this is the drill that's inside it that you're going to land onto the meteor with and drill into the meteor with. And then Bruce Willis is like, what is this piece of technology? Like, this is not going to help us whatsoever. So instead of sort of explaining to the scientists and the astronauts how you need to fix this piece of gear, drilling gear and transport, and have them upgrade it because they've got the knowledge of space travel and, you know, if it will actually physically stay together on a moving meteor, Bruce Willis just walks up to this little to this sort of piece of transport drone drilling thing, and he just starts taking it apart and trying to make adjustments and upgrades to it. And I'm like, no scientist is stopping him. They're just letting this driller, no knowledge of space travel, walk up and just upgrade their equipment for them without any discussion about it whatsoever, just ripping it apart and upgrading it. And I'm like, oh jeez, right? Like, no wonder NASA chose drillers to be on this mission. They have no control over these guys whatsoever. So that was just funny to see. And then they're all ready to go on their mission. They've all had their training. They're about to go on the mission, and NASA says, okay, you're all fit, you're all good, you're all ready, but obviously we don't know if this mission's going to be successful or not. We don't know if we're going to be here after your mission. So this is potentially your last night to live on Earth, or just this is going to be your last day of life potentially if this mission goes wrong. So go out, enjoy yourselves, and then come back and we'll do the mission tomorrow. And I'm like, hang on, you've just pointed out that they're fit to go out for training, and your first reaction is to let them go out on their own. Now, I know this is like their last day on Earth, so I really appreciate that, they're letting these characters enjoy themselves knowing it's their last day on Earth. But if they get hammered and drunk, they're going to be in no condition to go in a spacecraft or a rocket or whatever and go on this meteor and drill if they're hungover. This is like the worst idea. Not to mention, I presume once you're in space, I'm not an astronaut or anything, so I don't know if this is true, but I would imagine if you're going into space, your sensation of gravity and sort of I presume there's some level of maybe lightheadedness or something that feels like a strange sensation when you go in space travel. So if you're hungover, that's going to be doubled down on how disorientated you're going to feel in space. So don't let these guys go out and do whatever they want. If it's the last day of their lives potentially, they're going to be reckless with what they're doing. And of course, sure enough, they are. Steve Buscemi and someone else goes out to a pub and goes to a strip club or something, or goes to a bar, and then they get arrested. I can't remember why, but they get arrested, and I guess NASA has to break them out of bail them out. But it was just like, of course that was going to happen. So while they're off getting drunk and pissed out of their faces, we then cut to Ben Affleck, who, as I said earlier, is sleeping with Bruce Willis's daughter, and so spends his last evening sort of going on a picnic date with her, which I guess is kind of sweet, but to be honest, I was a bit worried that this scene was going to be really boring because they haven't really developed these characters much at all. I'm not invested in their romance whatsoever. But then the scene is saved, this really cheesy scene of Ben Affleck going on his last date with Bruce Willis's daughter. That scene is saved by the fact that Ben Affleck is playing with animal crackers on his girlfriend's body on his potentially last evening with her. And somehow this works for her and she's turned on by it and she's having the best time ever. When all he's doing, he got an animal cracker out of a packet of animal crackers and he's just sort of playing with the animal cracker on her belly. Like you do, like you play with a toy with a kid. She's doing that with her, but on her belly with a piece of food that's shaped like a dinosaur or whatever it was, like an animal. And this works for her. And I was so happy that this scene, this was part of the scene, because I was so worried that this was going to be such a boring scene, when in actual fact, it was the most bizarre scene of the film. More bizarre than the idea of sending drillers to be trained as astronauts out into space. What's more weird than that is that Bruce Willis's daughter was turned on by Ben Affleck playing on her belly with food. That was just the strangest thing ever, and that will forever be iconic to me to associate that scene with this movie. So yeah, that's a treat for when you guys see this film, if you haven't already seen this film. So yeah, bizarre, really bizarre. And as I think I've mentioned this earlier, the big bad point of this film is we really don't know anything about the team members. except for their stereotypes that they play. Like, you know, Bruce Willis is an overprotective father, Ben Affleck is like the rebel of the group, Bruce Willis's daughter is kind of like the tomboy because all she's ever known is this drilling company lifestyle since she was a kid, and Steve Buscemi plays like the horny guy, and Owen Wilson plays kind of like the dumb guy who's kind of like a free spirit amongst the crew. Like, they're all just playing stereotypes, and I thought the fact that we get to see what they want to do on their last day of living would give us more of an insight into what these characters are all about. But no, I'm an idiot for thinking that, because obviously this film has clearly established that it is just in kind of the B-movie territory, and I don't know why I expected to see more character development. We get none of that whatsoever, and I'm kind of okay with that, but it would have been a bonus. So after they've had their last evening on Earth, the mission is about to begin, and the team is sent to space with, luckily, a few people who are actually experienced astronauts. And I'm like, okay, right, so you're not just going to let these drillers drive the damn rocket. You're actually going to let trained astronauts do the flying for you. I'm like, okay, all right, so this film is a little bit logical at least. But unfortunately, I kind of wished that this film at this point hadn't have been logical, because with that first sign that this movie knew how impractical it was to send drillers to be trained as astronauts to space, this is where the movie started taking itself too seriously, and it started losing me a bit. It started raising the stakes that, oh, we got to save the world, this meteor may kill billions of people if we don't stop it, and it was trying to sort of have this sort of inspirational moment as this team of misfits walk into this rocket ready to be launched into space. And I was starting to like get a little nervous that we were losing the B-movie quality and silliness of this film, which unfortunately we kind of were. So they get sent out into space in this rocket with astronauts. They catch up with the meteor, and I actually like the design of the meteor. It's got a really unique crystal design that almost looks dreamlike with the variety of colors that are flowing around the meteor. Like, it actually was a kind of a unique, cool design, and I was kind of up for seeing something that trippy. And then the ship starts falling apart, I think because it hit part of the meteor, and it killed the pilots who had no helmets on while they're in this one of the ships that crash, and somehow again they're still able to take a few seconds to scream in the vacuum of space, and I'm like, okay, at least it's consistent with the first death when that happened in the film. But again, it was just like, you can't scream in space, guys. Like, you're not protected by a force field of oxygen with all this ship coming apart. So yeah, but luckily they have a backup ship that is also following the meteor, so they were split off into two teams, basically, in these two ships, which took a little while for me to catch on to, because I thought, oh, okay, they just died, which is a bit of an abrupt ending. But no, they had a second ship, which is also following the meteor. That ship, so the one that's falling apart and has the pilots killed, that ship crashes. I think they both crash, actually. Yeah, now that I think about it, both the ships crash, and so they get out of the broken ship and they attempt to continue the mission. The team are unable to successfully drill for the meteor, so instead the military start a countdown of a secret bomb that they've planted onto one of the ships in order to try and blow it up as a backup plan, which, according to the scientists, won't work, but the military are like, I don't care about how smart you are about space travel or meteors, we're going to do this regardless. And again, it's just the military being represented as being really dumb in movies, but I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. But the bomb thing was just really boring. I think the whole aspect of having a bomb on the ship secretly was really dragging the film out, because all they really needed to do in that third act was fly out, land on the meteor, drill into it. It might not work, it might work, and then, oh no, we drilled into the meteor and it explodes and we save the Earth. But instead, they kind of like focus too much on this secret bomb, because basically they can't drill into the meteor fast enough. So the military are like, okay, well, it's a good thing we planted a secret bomb on this ship, because then we can blow the meteor up that way, even though the scientists have established that's not going to work. And it just kind of drags the scene out a bit, because it's this sort of, we know from the start of this film that of course they're not going to kill everyone on the planet, so we know that they're going to save the world. There's nothing indicating to me that they're not going to actually save the world, so I don't feel any suspense anyway, and nothing particularly funny is really happening anywhere in this scene, so it's just kind of attempted suspense that doesn't work whatsoever, and it's just dragging out the scene. So I mean, the only silly thing in this third act is Steve Buscemi, who I think they say he's getting space. He's basically getting crazy from being in space for so long. I can't remember what they call it. He's getting space dementia. And so he's just losing his mind to the point where he's ruining the mission. He's actually accidentally destroying part of the equipment from just messing about with the fact that he's lost his mind being in space for so long right now. And apart from him, they're just taking the scene really seriously, and I kind of zoned out. I'm like, okay, right, I'm just not interested in this film whatsoever. You started off really strong in how silly you were being in the first two acts, but now in this third act, I've just lost all interest whatsoever. There's no stakes, nothing funny is happening, you're taking yourself too seriously. Michael Bay, your Michael Bay-isms were strong in the first two acts of the film, but now you've just lost all sense of what the hell you're trying to do with this film. Anyway, as predictably is happening, they get a few problems along the way, but they overcome them. The drilling that they're doing causes some kind of not an earthquake, but like a meteor quake. Like it's disrupting the meteor, and so everything's shaking. And tons of crew members are getting killed off from the fact that things are just parts of the meteor breaking off and flying at them. Then the drilling is completed, but only because Bruce Willis lets the team fly off back to Earth safely, and Bruce Willis sacrifices himself and stays behind so he can detonate the bomb to essentially finish off blowing up this meteor. So they've drilled far enough into the meteor, they're going to blow up the rest of the meteor, and Bruce Willis has sacrificed himself to let his team members live back on Earth. By the way, the fact that I thought these spaceships were broken was false, because for some reason they managed to get them working again, so the rest of the team members could fly back to Earth, so that was pointless as well. Yeah, it's just a really predictable ending, but I'm not saying this movie was trying to be clever, it's just that it was taking itself too seriously in that last act, and so everything felt empty, and I didn't feel anything for that part of the movie. Yeah, so the world's saved. Bruce Willis sacrificed himself, stopped the meteor, the team gets back, they're all heroes, everyone's happy, and I think Ben Affleck marries Bruce Willis's daughter in the end, because I think Bruce Willis gets around to liking him, which again is predictable, which is fine, because it had a B-movie feel at the beginning. Sorry, I'm like droning on, but like really, that third act really brought the movie down for me. But yeah, the Earth was saved. The meteor was blown up. Everyone was happy except for Bruce Willis, who died. I guess he died doing what he loved. Yeah, that was the insanity that is Armageddon. This might be the most ranty review I've done so far in this podcast, but it's just insanity, this film. The cast was very surprising. As I said, I didn't expect to see Owen Wilson and Steve Buscemi appear in the team, but it was kind of like a cool treat to see them in the movie amongst other actors that I don't know the names of, but I've seen them before. But again, they do just all play stereotypes. As you know, as I said, there's a horny guy, an overprotective father, a rebel, a dumb one, a fat one. We really don't get to know much about them whatsoever as people, and that's something that could have really been fleshed out in a 2.5 hour movie. However, the movie mostly at least knows exactly what it wants to be, to the point where I actually thought it was going to be my favourite Michael Bay movie, but because of that last boring act where they actually go out into space and do the mission, which is the whole point in the movie, that should have been the point where you could go as crazy and Michael Bay as possible, and yet it just took itself too seriously. It was the most boring part of the film, which is so weird when you're watching a film about people who are going to get sent out into space, and yet everything before that is the most interesting part of the movie. It was just so weird that it took itself too seriously. So, you know, as far as I can tell right now, my favourite Michael Bay film is still currently The Island. But yeah, it was just this... Like, I watched this movie, and I was so excited to see a really dumb Michael Bay film, to the point where I was like, oh, this is going to be like my new guilty pleasure movie. And in that third act, I'm like, I don't know if I can go through that again. That was so boring for me. But yeah, I don't know. Like, this film is so silly that I have no idea if I've sold you this film or if I've just convinced you that you're never going to watch this. But regardless, that's everything I have to say about Armageddon. I kind of still recommend it just because how dumb most of the film is, in a good way. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what other people think about this film. I'm very surprised that it's taking me this long to see this film because I've heard a lot about it. Not all, surprisingly though, I haven't heard about the things I actually liked about the movie. I actually heard about the things that just seemed really boringly generic. But yeah, I guess I recommend it. I wouldn't not recommend it. I mean, I'm happy I got to see it. But I also doubt I'll see it again for a long time, to be honest. But that's all my thoughts. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Sorry it was a bit of a rant, but this movie is bizarre. Like and share to support the channel, subscribe to keep up to date with all my movie, TV and video game talk, and if you'd like to further support the channel, then please check out the link in the description to listen to The Undersider's new single called Take It Off. Thank you so much for all your support, it's always appreciated, so for now, stay safe and take care.